Welcome to another Intro to Java Programming video. In this video, we're going to look at how we can use methods from classes on objects of those type. I'm going to make a circle that I can control to make bigger and smaller and change its colors through GUI controls. We've seen something like this before. When we did this before, we did this through a nested inner class. We did something similar, not exactly the same. But what I've got is a JPanel class that just draws a circle and that's it. I've got a method to make the circle bigger, a method to make the circle smaller, and then I've got some buttons to move it up and down. You'll notice up and down don't work because I haven't created a method to do anything with that. We are going to do that later on in this video. And then I've got other controls that will change the color red, blue, and green. Okay? Now let's take a look at these files. We'll look at the circle frame first. The circle frame is a JFrame. It implements action listener and item listener. I have a couple panels, control panel, title panel, and then I've got a label called title. I've got my buttons bigger, smaller, up and down do nothing. I've got some radio buttons, red, blue, and green. I've got a button group, color group, and a circle called circle. Now that comes from this class circle, which extends JPanel. So this circle here is a JPanel. Just like always, I've got a main method and I do all the stuff that I always do in the main. Remember, like we talked about in the last video, this that I'm doing here, making this circle JPanel, is no different than what we've been doing for a long time with nested inner classes, except I'm just taking all that stuff from the nested inner class and putting it in a standalone class in an external file. Then I'm going to instantiate the circle panel into this frame. So circle frame 1, that's going to be my frame. And here I'm setting the size of the frame, creating my GUI, and setting visible to true, just like always. Let's create GUI really quickly. Set up title, set up controls, and set up circle. So set up title is just going to set up that title panel on the top, and then the J label on that says change circle and add it, and then add it to border layout north. When we run this, you're going to see that the title is at the top, the circle is in the center, and the controls are at the bottom. So title up here, that just corresponds with all this that's happening. Circle is right here in the center, and then the control panel is at the bottom. Set up controls, this is me setting up all my buttons. So you can see I'm making my bigger and smaller button, my up and down button, adding action listeners to everything, setting up my radio buttons, adding item listeners to the radio buttons, adding creating the color group, adding the radio buttons to the color group, and then adding everything to the control panel, and then eventually adding the control panel to border layout south. This is just basic GUI stuff. We've been working on this now for many weeks, and hopefully you don't need me to explain any of this stuff. If you do need me to explain this stuff, you can go back and watch those videos on creating GUIs. There's all that stuff. Let's go to setup circle. Setup circle, what I'm doing is I'm instantiating my circle and then adding it to border layout center. Now when I set my circle, what I'm doing is I'm setting the circle on center on the middle of my JFrame. Okay, so I'm setting its size to 250 by 250, and I'm setting the X and Y. Okay. Now let's take a look at the circle class. This is our constructor here. You'll notice it takes in X, Y, height, and width. I should actually make this width height so it sticks with common convention for all of our J stuff. That's probably better. If you want to swap that, do so. It's not going to change the way the program functions because it's 250 and 250 that are passed in there. But it'll just stick with the convention for, things like drawing rectangles and ovals and things like that. Anyways, I'm using these values from the parameter x, y, width, height to initialize my loc(x), loc(y), height, and width instance variables. Let's look at the instance variables here. So public class circle extends JPanel. So this circle class that I'm using here, that I'm using to draw this panel here with a circle in it, It is a JPanel. It extends JPanel, so it has all the JPanel-like stuff. It's going to have access to all the JPanel methods, all the JPanel variables. It is a JPanel. Color is going to be circle color, and I'm initializing that to black. Okay, so I'm using my constructor to set up the height, width, X, Y, and color. If I wanted to, I could change this to pink. Oops. And then next time I run it, the default color is going to be pink instead of black. I'm using the constructor to set up the initial state of my circle panel. Here's my paint component. In my paint component, I'm anti-aliasing like always. I'm setting the color to circle color, so I'm using that instance variable to update the circle color, and I'm filling my oval to loc X, loc Y, and I should do width height here, not height width. So I'll swap these. X, Y, width, height. And that's going to draw my oval. Now, set color is a method that I'm using to change the color of the circle. So set color on G2D is going to take the circle color and set it to the graphics context. Set circle color is going to have a parameter, and then it'll update the value that's in that circle color variable. We also have a method called set size, which is going to take in an int, and it's going to update size. Remember, this syntax here plus a sign is the same thing as this. It's taking the height, and then it's adding the height to the size and reassigning it into height. What this is doing is updating the value. So if 10 comes into size, it's going to add 10 to the height and reassign that into height, thereby increasing the height by 10. So width is width plus size. If 10 comes in here, it's going to add 10 to the width and reassign it back into width, thereby making it 10 pixels bigger. All right? Now let's see how these methods are used. They're going to be used in action performed and item state changed. So that is my circle object, and then I add that panel to the border layout center. You can see, once again, it gets added right there. Now let's take a look at making those buttons interactive. So here's the deal. We make these classes to distribute the code elsewhere and make it more modular and organized. And we have that problem of, well, if all that data is in another class elsewhere, how do I modify it? How do I update it? Well, we have to provide an interface for the user to manipulate that object. And the interface is always going to be methods. In this case, it's going to be two methods, set circle color and set size. Okay, let's see how they're used. We'll go to action performed first because it's a simpler one. It's just going to check the bigger and smaller buttons. So if the bigger button is pressed, set size gets 10. So what's going to happen when I press the bigger button, the set size method gets invoked. Now let's review this. Circle is my circle panel object. So I instantiate an object of type circle. The dot operator is like my accessor. It's an open doorway to everything in my circle class. And what I can do with that dot operator is I can pick on the circle color method, the size method, or the constructor, and I can call on any of those or invoke any of those. So in this case, the dot operator is going to call on or invoke the set size method. So when we see this, for this particular circle object, I'm going to set its size by 10. That's going to take the 10, pass it in here, and it's going to update the height and width by 10, thereby making the circle 10 pixels bigger. Smaller is going to update it by -10. So circle dot set size, remember dot operator is our open door to our circle object, to circle class members. Set size is going to take in -10, and it's going to add -10 to the height, thereby subtracting 10 from the height and subtracting 10 from the width. And then we repaint. Remember, if I do object name.repaint, if that object has a graphics context, we're going to invoke the paint method. So this is an explicit invocation of the paint method. In other words, I'm calling on the paint method, I'm making the paint method execute here. So I go to the circle class for this circle object, and I do everything in the paint component. So what it's going to do here is it's going to look at the now updated width and height, because when I hit bigger or smaller, it updates the width or the height. And when I do that, it's going to look at those new values and redraw the oval with that new size. All right? That's what the bigger and smaller do. Let's look at item state changed. If the source is red, it's going to call on set circle color and then repaint. So once again, dot operator opens the door to the object's members. It's going to call on the circle color method and put red into it. So it's going to come here and it's going to update circle color to red and then repaint. So it's going to then execute everything in paint. Oh, set color, it's no longer to be pink, it's going to be red. And then it's going to draw the oval for whatever values are held in loc x, loc y, width, and height. So this is really how we use methods from a class to get new data into an object of that class and update its state. Okay? I'm over here manipulating my circle through methods. The big thing that you have to know is if you want to manipulate an object from a class, you have to have that object adjacent to your controls. In other words, I have to have an object in the same class, in the same scope that those controls are. So if all of my controls are instance variables here in my circle frame class, I have to have a circle object as an instance variable in this class as well, so that those J components can interact with the circle. All right, that's how we use methods to update the state of an object. This is one of the important principles of object-oriented programming. You have an object, you use methods to update it. In the next video, we're going to kind of put this all together, and what I'm going to do then is I'm going to distribute out the controls in a separate class, all the GUI stuff in one class, all the circle stuff in the circle class, and then I'm going to bring them all together in the frame class so that I can very easily make several controllers along with several circles. And we'll have 2 controllers and 2 circles that'll behave independently from one another. This could be our last lesson on object orientation. Thanks for watching.